they occupy a portion of your life because your fight and flight is operating on steroids, and your fight is making these decisions. Sometimes they're wild kind of decisions, but once you make it through there, whatever decision you make, if you traumatize and re-traumatize, if you recover, there's a resilience building mechanism, just in our nervous system. And
I
so we learn how to do things like, our kids. I was afraid that my granddaughter's going through the pandemic and having a baby
right.
and not having a job and living in the Eastern Panhandle.
Right.
But she fortunately is having a baby by a guy that's going to take care of it. Seems, so it all worked out so far.
Right.
But I'm kind of getting off track here because I'm just I'm listening to people's stories, and mine statistically is supposed to be different, and it's not. And so I'm here to serve, man. By the way, John, you really look cool, man, with your new surgery going on there. And
well, that's most of the haircut, man. I'm trying to keep my mouth shut so it doesn't turn.
Me too. Hey, Scott, how are you? We're just rambling over here.
I'm good.
Yeah.
How are you guys?
Good morning. I apologize, everybody, for getting the notice out really late. I was having a traumatic affair with my dentist, most of the week, and so. Wow, Scott, you are looking trim.
Yeah, everybody's looking.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to hippie stuff?
Well, I finally got to go to a barber.
Yeah, right. Me too. Oh man. Anyway, so I apologize for and I think JB ended up having another commitment here, so we'll see whether we get any other takers. I wanted to start out this morning with a clip, a very short clip, really, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC's remarks on the border crisis, and her description of it as a crisis of imperialism. And let's see if I can make sure that comes on here.
Are you for real? So let's talk about this, because so much of our national conversation, which is not a conversation about immigration, is driven by people who could not care less about immigrants. Often people want to say, why aren't you talking about the border crisis? Or why aren't you talking about it in this way? Well, we're talking about it. They just don't like how we're talking about it, because it's not a border crisis. It's an imperialism crisis. It's a climate crisis. It's a trade crisis. And also, it's a carceral crisis, because as I have already said, even during this term and this president, our immigration system is based and designed on our carceral system. Those are some of the problems. What about the solution? Well, number one, our solutions need to be rooted in foreign policy, because our interventionist history in foreign policy and history over decades of destabilizing regions drive people to. But people don't want to have that conversation. Secondly, let's talk about the climate crisis, because the US has disproportionately contributed to the total amount of emissions that is causing a planetary climate crisis right now. But who is bearing the brunt of that? Disproportionately, it's actually not us. We help create the problem, but disproportionately, it's the global South. It's South Asia, it's Latin America that are going to be experiencing the floods, wildfires, and droughts in a disproportionate way, which ding, ding, ding has already started a migration crisis. But people don't want to have that conversation. Then we have the issues of trade, which economically contribute, can have contributions to some of these conditions that add fuel to the fire. But people don't want to have that conversation. They want to say, what about the surge? Well, first of all, just gut check, stop. Anyone who's using the term surge around you consciously is trying to invoke a militaristic frame. And that's a problem because this is not a surge. These are children and they are not insurgents.
All right, that's the. Let me stop the share there. All right, so well, I was going to ask for comment on that on her pitch there on it, and whether or not the question of imperialism. Maybe we should decide what we think that is. Uh, is really the right context in which to talk about the so-called immigration in general. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I think she's brilliant. She's absolutely correct. You know, where are most of these people coming from? They're coming from Honduras, Guatemala, and why are they coming there? Because the U.S. has made their countries. U.S. foreign intervention over decades has made their countries ruled by fascist right-wing militarists and have wrecked their economies and so on. Climate change, one of the reasons is, unnatural severe droughts in Honduras over the last several years, destroying the ability of peasants there to grow anything. Just one after another. Refugees presenting themselves at the border are not supposed to be treated as criminals and locked up. They're supposed to be welcomed and given an interview and a court date, and allowed to go about their business as best they can, even with some assistance. So on every point, she's absolutely right. And she's also absolutely right that there's too many people who don't want to talk about it in that way. But, 3 cheers for AOC.
Right. I'll just add something real quick. I would add to everything she said the question of the pandemic, because there's evidence that some people are going through all of that so that they can get their kids vaccinated or they can get vaccinated. And that just shows the complete control of the pharmaceutical companies and all of that the vaccines are not being sent to those places where they need them more than any place else. And I think that's a horrible aspect of U.S. imperialism too.
Let me introduce this past week. I think it was Joe Sims actually that sent me a link to an interview with Ken Rogoff, who was a former chief economist for the International Monetary Fund and a Harvard economist, a big name in the economics profession. Anyway, about a decade ago, he got nailed pretty bad for a book and a paper that he wrote. He and a colleague named Carmen Reinhardt, also a top economist, in which they blamed most of the world's problems on excessive debt. I'm oversimplifying a lot, okay, but that was kind of a theme in there. And as part of their kind of policy recommendation, mainly in an international framework here for countries around the world, they sort of said, well, why don't we if you set 90% of gross domestic product as the upper bound of how much debt you should incur, like double what you're producing, something like that, then, you might forestall, all these collapses and, degradation and everything else that happens if you get your money's worthless because you borrowed too much. Anyway, it turns out that a bunch of radical graduate students at the University of Massachusetts, blew a big hole in their calculation that about the 90% number. And it happened right in the middle of the Obama administration, where the Republicans used his argument to undermine Obama's attempts to get more bills passed, right? And so when he was exposed to be an error and ridiculed at some level because he was a top guy, right? Him and his partner. He backed off a bit. He apologized. He said it was an error, all that. But now he has an interesting proposition. That's really one of the ones that was in his original book. He says the outcome of this pandemic economic crisis is going to be a K-shaped recovery. And what that means is the rich nations will recover and the poor ones will not, or not in time. And it speaks, I think, in a very profound way, because right now all the developments are pointing that he is right. All of what's going on right now, both the distribution of vaccines and the corresponding capacity to recover, are following exactly what we're saying, and follows AOC's argument that this is an aspect of imperialism, which is, we can, maybe another part of the program here we can address as a inherent feature of how market-based societies, capitalist societies, must expand, and how you're bound and determined you're going to get involved in these conflicts, and the outcome has been exactly what she said.
Yeah, let me weigh in a little bit. The carceral piece, imprisonment, that's really, really personal to my people, and the imperialism, the burden of the black man in this country. And so in this day and time, things are coming to light, and people are starting to come into a new sense of knowledge and figure out what these things, because the narrative drives the people, and the people drive the country, shaping the narrative. And most people are not even aware of the idea of a nation being set up, and they grow up dependent on a carceral system, a system of imprisonment. And so what she was saying is just startling to me to become aware of in such a traumatic way. I mean, so that's what's creating a lot of these explosions in the black and Latino and Asian, all these communities. I mean, people are getting out of jail. Inside they're coming awake, and so what she's talking about is what she's actually aware of. She's witnessing and bringing this information back. But they part of the plan is to call her crazy, to call her misinformed, to call her all these things that she's not. Insurgents. When did a baby become an insurgent? So they create these whole ideas around something that gives them permission to kill people and imprison people. So, I mean, I could be wrong, but that's just my take. It scares the hell out of me to even, to hear this kind of, and to know that it can happen, it's not far-fetched to me for places, pockets in this country to become occupied, so to speak, like a Gestapo, it's just a big prison camp, and I don't know. It's just. Well,
I think that's. Anybody want to? I think an aspect of this is to have is to debate whether or not you have a systematic issue, and how, by what principles do you try to fix it, and what makes sense. And so if people say, well, for example, she says this is a crisis of imperialism. Well, what is the solution to this imperial posture? And in the old days, I think in some of the original documents that were the Russian communists were writing about this was that it was pretty much a test of you couldn't get rid of imperialism without getting rid of capitalism. And whether or not that's ultimately true or not, I guess we're all going to find out. But in the meantime, I keep being drawn into trying to figure out a way to bring into our country these principles of peaceful coexistence.
That's right.
That were articulated during the 50s and 60s, in the various conflicts between the U.S. and Russia, and then China and India got involved. And I mean, it's an evolved concept that presumes there's going to be different kinds of social systems at work in the world, and how do you respect the differences? Okay, and if one country says, no, I'm not going to permit the whole country to be completely run by free market principles, what does that mean? We have to have a world war over it. What was the principle at work in the U.S. occupation or whatever conflict in Vietnam? What was the purpose? I mean, what is? Because Vietnam was going to be communist led. Well, if they want to be communist led, what business is it of somebody else? I mean, if they don't want to be communist led, fine, okay. But if they do, for the moment, what business is it? But how do you get that principle to be a governing principle and a leading principle? Because it certainly is not in the United States right now.
It's a tough fight. Because a lot of people on the left don't believe in the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence either. They've been bred with the superpower mentality with their mother's milk. They're suckers for the idea of humanitarian intervention. Yep. The idea is that, well, we should send troops in to aid this or that rebellion against some dictator in a third world country. A lot of, depending on the situation, I found people, even very close to me politically, who they do not like the idea. So there's a lot of people in DSA right now who are fully supportive of the idea of East Turkestan, and it should break away from China. And when I raise the question of non-interference, five principles of peaceful coexistence, that's China's internal affair. They just go bonkers. They're just ready to throw it out the window.
Interesting. Yeah. Right. I mean, there's it's a little bit there's a certain.
And other people, another argument is I got very good people very close to me who want the U.S. government to end some kind of assistance to people fighting against Assad in Syria. They want to see Assad overthrown, and they want our government to help the forces that's trying to overthrow them.
Right.
If I could just jump in on a different point, you guys know me, I'm a rising tide guy. It's really interesting to watch the news media that like MSNBC and CNN talk about the rise in wealth inequality as a result of the crisis, and making like they've been pointing out that how much of the wealth has gone to the top 1% and how much is being not going to the bottom, that they're accumulating wealth way more than the bottom 50 or 60% or whatever that is. I mean, they're actually showing charts from EPI and stuff like that on this kind of stuff on those shows. And I mean, the fact that you have mainstream media beginning to talk about these kind of inequalities is something pretty incredible to me. And it's not the same, well, it is sort of the same thing. The coverage of the Chauvin trial and what they are pressing in terms of police murder and highlighting all of this kind of stuff is just I mean, there really is a big change going on in our culture, I think, and I think that's a real important part of all of this.
Uh, well, I have another question about the connection between um, a multicultural and multi-ethnic, multinational, multiracial society and one's cultural in order to in achieving a culture in which cooperation and respect for diverse national and ethnic cultures or is a project that usually is done by getting people to work together, right? Once people work together and practically, then they learn to collaborate, and they know you can't collaborate by being disrespectful or insulting or not listening or all the things that we that make it easy to get jobs done.
That's the first step. First step.
Yeah. But in doing that, then all of a sudden, you're the countries and the locations from which these different kinds of people come from. Your relations with those nations as a country to country has to be altered. And the concept of racism in particular, or concepts, history, all of a sudden become very closely linked, right? Because the way reaction, tends to react is that they employ their racist prejudices in a way directly at international conflicts. I mean, look at how the enemy is characterized in racial and ethnic and, in terms in so many cases. So I'm wondering about, the role of internationalism. Does that term have to have a cultural meaning, in a civil democratic U.S. society?
I think it starts with a fight for solidarity. I think that's Fred Hampton put it best. He says, we don't fight fire with fire. We don't fight racism with racism. We fight racism with solidarity. I think that, he was very much on to something there. I'm also a minority on this question, but I also like a position taken by an old friend of mine, Noel Ignatian, of race abolitionism. We got these color concept races: white, yellow, red, brown. And I think we need to abolish them all. Abolish the concepts. Because they're simply the color races are first of all they're not races in any biological sense. They're political concepts designed to hold us all down. So I tell people, I said the society designates me as white, but I don't accept it. I say I'm a Scots Irish hillbilly. I said that's a social construct too, but it has some basis. It has some basis in history and reality that I can take it on, rather than I said my skin's not even white; it's pink. But the pink supremacy doesn't have quite the right ring. So there's your clue. It's a political concept.
You have some Andy Jackson political background there somewhere.
So anyway, I'm a race abolitionist. Let's put it that way. But that that doesn't mean I'm everybody's one. In the sense we still have African Americans as a people, not as a race, but as a people. We have me as a Scots Irish, hillbilly people. And there's all kind. We all have an ancestry and which has a culture that we can point back to, and we have a common American culture too, which has largely been influenced by African Americans. But so anyway, I think race abolitionism is what I'm gonna. I'm arguing for these days. It's to try and emancipate people's minds.
Hmm.
You know, because they get so
To a
tangled up.
greater resolve. To a
Because
greater resolve.
as long as they cling to whiteness, that they're white rather than a worker, they're trapped.
But Carl, you got to be careful with that Scotch Irish thing.
I
Why
know
is
the
that?
Scotch Irish do
You know,
not
like,
have a
Because
good
the Irish
reputation.
do not appreciate what the Scots did in Ireland. So,
I know. Scotch Irish. We were Ulster Scots, and when we got over here, where they renamed us Scots Irish.
no, I know.
Well, I thought Andy Jackson, that was his
Yeah, that's
huge document, his origin.
I'm of the same ancestry as Andy Jackson and John C. Calhoun as well.
Oh, God.
And I am too.
Yeah, my own great
I'm Scotch
grandfather.
Irish.
My own great grandfather came over here, and he got. I think he was an orphan, and he ended up in Kansas. But he made up an entire biography and ancestry. At
Well,
least
that's creative.
the one that he made up, that hasn't been able to be verified. Okay, even though he did get his sister into the Daughters of the American Revolution.
There was a lot of that.
They weren't checking that, but you head out to the frontier, you don't know who you are. You just make the whole thing up, right? And
Well, my daughters can actually be in the DAR 5 different ways. So I did trace the family history back. I got a lot of fourth great grandfathers who fought in the revolution.
Right. So, anybody else on this question got any thoughts? I'd like to move on at some point to talking a little bit about the Bessemer election. There's some things I don't want to talk about because I want to wait for the union to weigh in. I'm assuming they will. But anybody else on the AOC remark? I think we've covered the ground a little bit here. All right, none. Okay, so it looks like the union lost the election about 2-1. Well, yeah, 2-1. And there's been already several articles that have appeared on it, and I highly recommend everybody go to portside.org and read Frank Imsbach's recent posts there. For those of you who don't know who Frank Imsbach is, he hates this, but but his father was Julius Imsbach, who was the one of the founders of the UE, Secretary Treasurer for until he died in 1962 or 3, something like that. And he also was an officer himself of the GE Lynn, Massachusetts local, and a very effective guy. Very smart guy. Later ended up getting a PhD in something and ended up running, I think, a University of Wisconsin labor studies program. And a kind of acerbic but very sharp guy. So I recommend you take a look at that because it does the first thing that I think all need to do, and that is to congratulate the heroic effort of the RWDSU. It's at staff, and of course, above all, the union committees in the shop and the warehouse that going up against Amazon in that kind of circumstance. I have nothing but respect for it, and the fact that I don't think it's going to be over. The odds of winning an NLRB election, ever since about 1973 or 4, somewhere in there, have gotten worse and worse and worse and worse because all you got to do is fire one worker or watch bribes turn, supporters into no votes, or just the tyranny of information. That a company with Amazon's resources can exploit, as well as all kinds of, external political, like putting the mailbox, right in front of the plant, so that they would know that people who came to the mailbox in front of the plant instead of from their home near their home would be most likely company supporters who wanted the company to see them voting. And that's a little psychological analysis some union busting lawyer made, whatever, and it probably is true. But anyway, all these tactics are powerful. I get to open the discussion though a little bit by asking a question about labor organization in a company like Amazon, who has such monopoly power, such that it's not likely that it's likely that another 500,000, 500,000 deaths might have occurred had not the U.S., mainly through Amazon, had the capacity to, work remote, eat remote, live remote, buy remote, shop remote. Is a big factor, huge factor. And so Amazon cannot fail. It cannot fail. And that raises a certain question. I think in certain senses, the campaign for union organization in a plant or in a company like that, in a sense, has to, find a way to operate in a principled fashion in the company and with organizational resources, but it's not likely to get into an ordinary bargaining relationship, at least for right now, until Biden or the National Labor Relations Board or somebody like that compels it to happen. Now, the Wagner Act in 1936 would have permitted none of Amazon's activities prior to the election. None of them. They had no free speech rights under the Wagner Act, and for a while the Wagner Act was enforcing it. So Taft-Hartley changed all that. It made it okay for the company to tell you can be fired for joining the union or lose all your jobs. Now, technically, that's illegal, but in fact, it's legal, and it happens in every single labor board election, every single one. So I'd like to hear people's thoughts a little bit on. I'm sure this whole event here is going to open up a discussion in the labor movement about organizing, especially since the president has put himself saying, "I'm for it. I recommend you vote." He even said, "I recommend you vote." But of course, and we can argue about whether, all these public statements and external things were a sign of weakness or strength in some internal sense in the plant. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, how can the labor movement exploit Biden's position? How can rank and file work? If they want to organize, how does this now make it possible? And thinking through that, the labor movement, of course, which has very strong trades as well as service employees and industrial. They have to incorporate that diversity in any strategy that they go forward with, okay, and try to get something close to united if they can. But I think the role of the left formations, organizations, and stuff like that can play an interesting role, because it's possible that a new kind of unionism, for example, one that can embrace technical and production workers and service workers, a new kind of, needs to be formulated. Now, this happened in the 30s when mass manufacturing came up, and, John L. Lewis, because craft unionism was a disaster in mining, he kind of did it, and then the communists and the socialists and all kinds of other labor radicals, got involved and invented the CIO. And that was a unprecedented form of trade unionism at the time, a totally different one than the AFL had been before. And maybe ask a question here: Do we need a new transformation now? Anyway, I've said enough. See what you guys think here.
Yeah, I want to jump in on this. As usual, I have a book recommendation that totally fits the situation. If you guys have got your pencils, Lane Wyndham has a new book out called "Knocking on Labor's Door." And for all of us in our age group, if you read that book and you look at what happened in the labor movement in the 60s, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which many of us were a part of, including like organizing the workers anyway, I won't get into all of them, but you'll recognize a whole lot of the stories. Local 8888, some of you probably even remember that number. Busloads of people came from all over the country, particularly from young radicals, to support that organizing drives, which was one of the biggest organizing. It was in the steelworkers, one of the largest organizing drives of the century. Anyway, but Lane Wyndham's book is just almost a primer for what's happening now in the labor movement. And that's the point I also want to get to. I have friends that were involved in the organizing down there at Amazon, and the steel workers were playing a big role. You know, Bessemer's kind of a steel worker home. There was all kinds of support from the labor movement down there, and that fight, none of the union committee, I think the union committee ended up being about 900 people in that plant. And that's the committee, that's the organizing committee. And they're not going anywhere. A couple of them were fired, but they are going to court on a bunch of issues, a bunch of unfair labor, whatever violations that happened. And they're not even giving up on that aspect of it. But I'll tell you, in the discussions that I've been in several unions, everybody sees this as a turning point. People all across the labor movement are saying, you know, this opens the door for us to push. You know, I think everybody knows about the PRO Act, and the PRO Act, every single union in the country is fighting for the PRO Act, which basically does some of the things that it gets rid of Taft-Hartley. It does a whole bunch of things like that. And that is a rising tide in this country. And you talk about the labor movement moving to the left. Hey, I'll tell you this, from my point of view, communists have never been as prominent in the labor movement since the CIO days. We have people, presidents of central labor councils. We have people, presidents of their locals. You know, I think I told you guys this before. Two of us who are known communists are on the international executive board of the retiree organization. And that never would have happened without the okay of the leadership of the union. And they all, in fact, the president of the union picked me out to be the vice president. But anyway, what I'm just saying is that there is a rising tide in the labor movement. And I think one of the main things, I'll tell you what we're stressing in my organization is everybody get involved in these fights in any way you can. Including the unemployed fights, but the organizing drives and all of that. That's okay. I've ranted enough, but I really do think we're in a very good and a spark.
I agree with all the points that Scott's making. But I would frame it a little different. He's presenting the upside, but not the whole picture. And I think if we want to figure out tactics and strategy, we have to look at the whole picture of today. And I posted a little thing there that I wrote up this morning for commenting with some of my friends who were talking about the Bessemer defeat. And part of the problem is it's been, I start off, I quote Mrs. Thatcher. And we have a generation of workers now who have been more or less educated, unknowing to them, under the hegemony of Mrs. Thatcher, who famously claimed, along with Ronald Reagan, that there is no such thing as society. There's only individuals and families. And she's dead wrong. There is such a thing as society, but what it means is that the neoliberal order that we've been under for the last 40 years has taken one of its aims culturally has been to destroy the idea of solidarity, to drive it underground, and to develop an idea among the working class especially that you're on your own. You've got to be a bootstrapper. You can't trust the people next to you. You can't rely on them. You don't ask the government. Government can't do anything for you, and so on. That has become, I won't say, the majority, but at least a huge minority view among the workers themselves. They've been educated and surrendered unconsciously to Mrs. Thatcher's notion of who they are. That's why in Bessemer, half of the workers didn't even bother to vote one way or the other, because they don't see themselves as a working class. They see themselves as somebody who has a job and that they're on their own. So my point is this, that we on the left have a long battle, war of position through all the institutions of civil society, be it the unions or churches and schools, to wage the struggle to resurrect, to bring back to the top the culture of solidarity and mutual aid that is buried within our consciousness, but it's been beaten down. We have to bring it back up. And it's going to take more than just a union campaign to do it. That's my point. It's a much broader political and cultural effort that we have to reshape, and we have to reshape and rebuild a working class for today. That's that doesn't find itself under the thumb of Mrs. Thatcher and Reagan, unconsciously.
Just a real quick point on that. Carl and I like to have these little arguments. I'm kidding. In some recent polling, and it's not just one poll, 60% of workers in this country who could belong to a union would want to be in a union. That's a pretty high rising tide of people who see the union as, moving in the right direction.
A benefit to them. I agree.
And it's all of those figures are higher in minority communities.
Right.
So that's an important aspect of this.
I mean, you have to take the poll 2 times, though, in actual union organization. There's the are you for the union? Sure. What about if you're threatened to be fired, or the plant's going to be threatened to be moved? Are you going? What about then? Well, I'm not sure. I think you're right, Scott, about the shift in the mood. But let me ask this question. One of the things that PRO-ACT, I was reading some of the language, and it's interesting in parts of it, at least in one of the versions. I'm not sure it's been finalized. There is a little hole that was closed, even opened, that was even closed in the Wagner Act, and that was, does the union or any collective organization of employees have any right to bargain over company's mission or its direction. And that becomes that's an interesting question, because in European social democracies, and I actually think in most of a big portion of the Chinese companies, I'm not sure whether it's how many exactly there. I mean, Jack Ma was a party member. Maybe he still is.
Had to keep an eye on him.
But anyway, in most of these countries, okay, the idea of worker representation on management, worker representation, on worker access, at least union access to information about the company's management. How do I know? Show me the proof that you can't afford what we have proposed. In the United States, that's not a legal demand.
But it's in the PRO Act.
But it's in the PRO Act it is. See, you have a couple of holes in there that allow you to now, if you're organizing Amazon, for example, and you are now, when you organize, just to take this little theory a little one step further, when you organize, you are going to ask and seek representation at the highest levels of the company. Well, at that point, now your campaign, both must be and can be pro-company, because you have a vision for the company, not just an adversarial assumption, okay, that is, always a twisted kind of cooperation. Even when you want to cooperate, there's always, this, they lied to you to get you to cooperate. I mean, that kind of thing, right? So that's an important thing, especially for some of these companies like Amazon, okay, or and for example, take the developers. There are lots of developers, and I have two relatives that work for Amazon as software developers, and they love it. Okay, they think it's the greatest thing in the world. They're being paid six figures, and once you're being paid six figures, everything's wonderful. Frankly, okay. I mean, I mean, come on. But nonetheless,
They're also highly exploited, even if they're six
well,
figures.
yeah, still, but they still feel invested in their own version of the company and its mission. Okay, they're not, and it's important in Amazon if you want to take highly, valuable human capital, right? In other words, that software is being written by people who have the software in their head.
Right, for junior years.
Yes, So, again, reshaping the capacity of labor organization to be involved in the mission would also be a big draw amongst many of those workers as well. I'm just put that out there. Yeah.
Well, another thing about that is that all of that's going to be ours someday. So, keep it coming. Keep all that technical stuff coming.
That's right.
It's
Amazon is creating the mode of distribution for socialist order.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, all right.
Good. Well, I'm sorry. What was the other question? I was going to say something. I can't remember that you raised.
Me?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, I know. It comes back to me. I don't know if you guys know about the what happened in the teachers' union contract in Chicago. But one of the things that's in there, which is a thought that's going again circulating in the labor movement now, is bargaining for the common good.
Right.
And what bargaining for the common good means to the teachers is we not only get wages and working conditions for us and the people that work in the school, but we take into consideration the children and what they need. And that kind of bargaining for the common good, I know SEIU is discussing it. Several of those unions are discussing it because if they work in service areas in a neighborhood or something like that, why can't they say that, yeah, we want, we want good streets here. We want things to be taken care of. Anyway, that's a rising tide too, because more and more unions are thinking about that and what that means.
You know, West Virginia teachers could use, if you have a contact from Chicago teachers, that's a good concept to play. See how it plays in the AFT and WVEA things, because there's a weird thing that's happened since the strike, and the government has betrayed. The governor basically abandoned the agreement he made, and it's unbelievably bad here. And so that kind of concept could re-inspire those teachers, I think, if they thought there was a, because I've talked to teachers, and you take the fact that they got an agreement, then they got backstabbed, and then they had to go through the pandemic and the terrible situation of West Virginia schools in many respects, especially in many areas. Oh my God, they were losing people in droves. Okay, I couldn't keep up. They were working 2, 3, 4 more hours a day because the Zoom thing was uncomfortable, and the kids had a hard time. A lot of the kids didn't even have a device.
Oh, God, yeah.
People trying to use the Chrome Classroom on a cell phone. Are you kidding me? Anyway, so yeah, they might. If we could get a contact and get a little program circulated big time in the among the AFT, we can do that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll get this.
That'd be cool.
The upside to that is we're building resilience all around. I just like to weigh in a little bit about we the people. It's divide and conquer. That has always, and now it seems that the strategy is to pit winners against winners. To pitch the idea of the union, to be all inclusive, and there's a possibility in this country, even within the winner's circle, that for people of color, some people think that it's already all inclusive in this country. And the fruit begs to differ from my point of view. So, divide and conquer, we have to get back and really look at what Carl was talking about, something being much, much bigger than what we're actually talking about. And so we'll appear, and there's an illusion of inclusion, even within the winner's circle, but around the fringes and at the gatekeepers' posts, you're only allowed to get to a certain point. And it's because of your skin color. I think there was a conversation during the great imperialism time when it was being thought about, I would imagine, from what I've understood about what I read. And, there was a consideration at one time as to whether people of color would even be considered in that framework of being acknowledged as somebody human. So, so this imprisonment kind of ideology was developed, and it hasn't gone anywhere, obviously, because even within the winner's circle, there is this ideology that everything is all inclusive. As long as you're not first, or as long as you're not ahead of me, and as long as you're not a troublemaker, as long as you don't bring up certain stuff, you can continue to keep this illusion of inclusion. But when the rubber meets the road, there's so much disparity that has been embedded in the conscious brains of everybody, even people of color, that racism and bigotry somehow just goes away because we're informing people that it's around, or that people have decided to tear down some of the framework of the ideas around the blue wall of silence, and judges are deciding to, but my question is, now that we know, what the hell took everybody so long to know? All of us 60 and 70 and 80-year-old folk are raising hell about this new kind of information, and this, we're speaking up about it, But what the hell took us so long? We can't go back and answer that, but what we can do is figure out how to make sure that we know that racism is still alive and is still trying to claw its way into the consciousness of everything that we do and subscribe to, even within the winner's circle.
Yep.
And to sit back and think, and because we're creating all these billionaires and millionaires, when before people were straining to get the RCA color TV.
Yeah.
My parents had to struggle really hard to get that piece of paper that you put over your black and white TV so to make it color. And we had
My grandparents had that.
We had one of those.
now I got a 70-inch television in my house, in my apartment, that still works, and I have to get rid of it because I don't have another 70-inch one sitting somewhere in another room. But there's the illusion of inclusion. So as we can sprinkle a little salt around, some people are not going to get any of it. Those are the people who are walking around looking like disparity, and certainly definitely feeling like disparity that's developed into mental illnesses and everything. And so, we can, but until we get what Mr. Carl said, and I'm going to call you Mr. today, Carl, because you dropped some jewels on me, bro. He said it's much deeper than we even care to imagine. However, we do recover. Because when resilience comes knocking with the truth,
Right.
and resilience squares its shoulders in the face of adversity, and speak to the evil one and say, get thee behind me. I'm not none of yours. I hooked up with Carl. Anyway, so that's my take on this, John.
Thank you,
Good
Jim.
show, man. Good show.
I'll just close with I think we could maybe give our thoughts to the pro-union workers in Amazon. Unless you've been through a campaign like that, it's hard to. And remember, this is 80% African American workers in this warehouse. Unless you've been through a campaign like that and suffered the defeat, because these are massive efforts against a huge corporation, okay? But imagine to yourself what it would take for 900 people in a 5,000 worker plant to join a committee knowing that the company was going to fight them tooth and nail, and if they had their way, they'd fire every single one of them. They go through that and then they lose. They don't make it the first time. That's happened a lot, by the way. It took us 3 tries to organize the Lassen, South Carolina General Electric plant. And we had to learn a lot of lessons in between, how to correct our mistakes and how to deal with it. Well, right now, after the election they lost, I want to tell you that the atmosphere in that warehouse is repressive. You're wondering, can you stick it out? You're going to keep there. The company's watching you. They're going to know all this stuff. They're going to know. They'll figure it out, who's for and who's against. All right? And you're going to have to put up with that and defend yourself and, keep asserting your legal rights. They don't want to be caught firing you for a cause. You know, they don't want to be in a situation where you're fired for union openly for union activity, because the Biden administration will probably get you back to work. But you got to be still committed to go back to work to a place where you just suffered a defeat and you know they're out for you. And that the only foundation for that is exactly what Carl said: is solidarity with your brothers and sisters in that that's stuck with you through that.
They need to maintain their organization.
That's what will hold. And well, what will make holding the organization possible. And I hold those guys. I'm not that religious, but I hold those guys in my prayers. Okay, women and men, and because I know what I've lived through what they're going through right now, and it's my hat's off, you know, to the step that they took.
I want to make a real quick point,
Yeah.
and that is that if you look at what's happening in Georgia around the voter bill, one of the key factors is the pressure that ordinary people can put on the corporations in Atlanta. Well, that should be a lesson for us also in situations like this. There are a lot of ways that all kinds of people can show solidarity with those workers and take on socially what Amazon is doing. And I think that can be a very powerful force that's just now beginning to be thought about. But I think we can organize ways to put tremendous pressure on them to back off of this stuff.
Okay. That's a good last word. Okay, unless anybody else has one. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today, and I'll get this posted up on YouTube and everything. Say, boop, boop.
All right, perfect.
Thank you guys. All right, buddy.